Hello, everybody. Welcome to Narrative on a Tuesday night. It's good to be with you. I'm Zev Shalev. Heidi Kuda is in LA. How are you, Heidi?
I am wonderful. I love how we just crash and burn and go live. It's so exciting.
What she means by crashing is that we just finished putting the show together a few seconds ago, but it's a good one. Stick with us. It's going to be really good. We have Jen Taub here, who's the author of Big Dirty Money. You've heard of the book before. She's been a guest on the show before, but we never really had a chance to go into her book because we were talking about all the other things that were going on in the news. Tonight, we're going to explore all the dirty deeds that have happened in American business and American politics, which have corrupted our legal system, and what can be done about that. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation. Jen is amazing, and we'll be happy to take your questions and comments. And Heidi will be on both the Twitter chats and the YouTube chat, making sure that she's getting all those questions. And Heidi, coming up later, we've also got a lot of news that is going to be of interest to people involving the Epic hack, which is an interesting thing. And all of that is coming up in the starting block, which is happening right now. And there's a lot of news going on today. And I wanted to begin with Charles Bauzman. You remember this is the Russian gentleman who's he's actually American, but he's lived in Russia for 30 years. And he moved to Pennsylvania in 2018 in what must be some sort of disinformation campaign on behalf of the Russian government or the Russian Orthodox Church or something allied to the Russian state. Charles Bauzman, for all intents and purposes, is an agent of disinformation sent here by the Russians. And he started this organization there called Russia Insider, which is a news organization basically promoting Putin propaganda and Putin pro-Russian ideas and views. And we've exposed him on Narrative since the start of the season as being not only a participant of the Capitol riots or the insurrection on January the 6th, but actually there inside the Capitol and also organizing the event in the days and weeks leading up to January the 6th. We've seen him with Sean Moon of the Moonies. We've seen him organize events in Pennsylvania to stop the steal. We know that on January the 3rd, 3 days before the event, he was hosting the Moonies on the same day that the key instigators of the insurrection were having a meeting in the same town. We assume that means he and Moon and everybody else went to that meeting. So it's been a really interesting few days as we've been discovering, a few weeks actually, as we've been discovering exactly what he's been doing, and also played you on Friday the first video of him at the Capitol on January the 6th. I'm going to play you a little bit of that so you get a sense of what we're talking about. This little bit is just a little description of what we're about to see, which I've told you already. Now, Bauzman is in the next shot. You'll see him around the pillar in the Capitol, and the cameras are being streamed live on Parler, and they've been captured as a live stream. So that is Bauzman over there. He's by the arrow. And as we zoom in a little closer, you get a better sense of who he is. And finally, the shot that was able to identify him for the open source researchers was the close-up that got us the news. And this is him a little bit later on, also wandering around, shooting video. So it's pretty compelling stuff. Like, why is there a Russian disinformation agent wandering around the Capitol on January the 6th, shooting video, apparently live streaming? What was he doing involved in the organization? Why was he there as part of the Stop the Steal movement in Pennsylvania? He's not the only Russian that was there on January the 6th. There's a few of them, but it does seem to me like his role is particularly different because he used to live in Moscow And then on 2018, he decided to move back to America, where he spent, 2 years until January the 7th or thereabouts when he left the country. And we've been able to find new tape of him in an interview that's been dug up on the internet, which shows him explaining to another Russian propagandist really what he's all about. These clips are incredibly revealing about what his ideals are and also why he came to the United States. And the first one talks about how he sees the advantages of Russian culture. So this is Bauzman in his own words.
The Russians here are very, nationalistic about Russians as a race and as an ethnicity, and they've got a lot of other ethnicities in the country, but they don't have any problem with saying we don't want them to be in control or want them to be too many of them, and we want this place to be white and Russian and Christian, and for us white Russian Christians.
So that's, I don't know, Heidi, what your take on that is. To me, it's pretty revealing that his whole agenda was not just about Russia. It was about, white Russia and white Christianity in Russia.
This has been a very busy man, and what that little small clip just identified is everything that we've been saying, Dave Troy's been saying, Ann Nelson's been saying about why the extreme right wing has been tied to the Kremlin, been tied to Russia. They like that idea of this, white society. Let's face it, that's exactly what he's been touting, along with all the other propaganda points that he's been making.
Yes, because we also reported for the first time that he hosted the launch event for the National Justice Party, which was basically is a neo-Nazi party, and he hosted them at his barn in Pennsylvania. So, he's not only has an affinity for these people, he's helping them move their organization, grow their organizations, launch their organization by giving them accommodation, by giving them a facility to launch their event, which I'm sure no one else would do. And he's also really interesting on the topic of democracy. This is from that same interview where he discusses how he views democracy.
And what they've definitely done is they've rejected democracy. Now, they wouldn't be happy for me to say that because they make a big deal about their elections, and they claim that we're a democratic country, but that is definitely a fig leaf. And it's very interesting that many Russians think democracy is ridiculous and stupid and a fraud and a fake and something that that just doesn't work and should never be used as a way to govern the country. And it's openly discussed here on the talk shows. There are a lot of monarchists in Russia. The Russian church is very powerful and very influential, and they're straight up monarchists.
That's an interesting theme because we know he actually works for the oligarch, not directly works for the oligarch, but is connected to Konstantin Malofeev, the oligarch who's very close to the Russian Orthodox Church and who organizes their charities and funds all their weird events around the world that are basically fronts for anti-LGBT organizations. So it's revealing that he's so talkative about the Russian Orthodox Church, but it is also, it tells us that the Russians are really given up on democracy, which I don't know if that's true, but it's certainly something that Putin would want Americans to believe about Russia.
It's very sinister seed planting propaganda. And every weekend in America, there's a group of people going around saying the same thing, that our democracy is broken and, love your leader, Trump, and don't take your vaccines. And everything that he's saying and all the propaganda that he pushes, again, is encapsulated, I think, in those clips. And it really gives us an insight into what is happening right now at all the events that people like Jim Stewartson are bringing us every day to show us what the Mike Flynns are saying and the Simone Golds are saying. And right there, he said it. And for me, knowing that he's at the insurrection and he's an American citizen, allegedly, that's, to me, those are I hear those words and I don't see how that's not treasonous.
So he doesn't hold democratic values, that's for sure. The other thing he says in that interview, which I found really revealing, is that he talks about not being so much about an online publication, but about being a movement. So, he obviously came here with the intention to stir up a movement which is, white nationalistic and anti-Semitic in tone, and then also rile up people in Pennsylvania, which of course is a swing state, ahead of the elections and after the elections, to argue the stop the steal thing. So, and then obviously the video of him at the insurrection, just stunning to see, Putin's guy wandering around the Capitol taking video as the place is being ripped apart by those insurrectionists. Really, really interesting video. We'll stay on the story. It's a big story for us, and we'll keep it going here for you on narrative. But in other news today, I gather there's some information about the book, the Grisham book, I was going to say, but it sounds like another author. We're actually talking about the White House Communications Director, or the former White House Communications Director.
Yes, Stephanie Grisham, who worked as the press secretary, wrote a book called I'll Take Your Questions Now, LOL, a little bit late. And one of the really revealing things in that was the note that she identified when Trump met Putin in Osaka at the G20 and said off camera, I'm going to act a little bit tough, with you right now for the camera. Obviously, you vote in a reality TV guy, this is what you get. So that was one of the real shocking things that came out of that book.
Yeah, he was putting on a show, that's for sure. Remember the first time he came out in Helsinki with Putin? It was a pretty embarrassing thing. Hey, look, the time's passed so quickly because we played those two long clips. I'm going to go right to Jen because otherwise, we're going to run out of time with her. And I want to make sure that we're getting as much of our interview with Jennifer Taub. I'm always getting this wrong, and I just give up because, hi, Jen, how are you?
Hi, Zev. Let's keep it at the one syllable first name, and then we're good.
It's got to do with my South African accent, because as Heidi was telling me earlier, it's all. How do you say all? You said all, right? What? Oh, sure. Aw. You say aw, and I say aw.
Aw.
Yeah.
I'm from the Midwest. Aw, as opposed to ow. It's not ow. No one hurt you. It's aw.
It's
like
aw.
You're saying about it like what a cute baby. What would you say if you saw a cute baby? Aw.
Jen Taub is what you'd say, right?
Yes. That's
right.
Well
but
done.
But it's not the way I would say "oh." Anyhow, there you go. It's a South African accent thing. Nice to see you again. The paperback is out today, and we're so thrilled you came here on the day that it's coming out. Big Dirty Money is what it's called. Well, it looks different from the other one because it's a white cover, and it's really an interesting read. You've added a preface and something else about January the 6th. Tell us a little bit more about what's new in this particular version than the hardcover.
Oh, yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah. So it's kind of, bookended with new information. So there's a new preface that's almost like a pleading to Merrick Garland to do the right thing. I mean, the book kind of begins with, because, the book was published in October of 2020 before the election, right? So when I did the rewrites for this in the spring of 2021, there was that kind of feeling of relief because Trump wasn't reelected. But it was at that time, 70 days when I put the final, edits in, 70 days after he took office on January 20th. And I was at that time hoping that Merrick Garland would remember what he said when he, on his first day in office, to all the people at the Justice Department about how no one is above the law, and how he was still remembering when he was a younger man early in his career when he went into the Department of Justice, and he looked around and felt so proud to be there because people were doing justice. So I kind of asked him to, it's essentially a plea to him, which is sort of what I'm saying now, which is kind of step up. We have this major con artist who's dangerous to the democracy, who's been getting away with it for so many years. And there's a blueprint in place. So that's the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Tell us about what else is at the end that's different.
At the end, so the epilogue is called Crime After Trump. And before there was an after Trump, it was just a hopeful statement that, I hope he's gone, but that he didn't start the current white collar crime wave, and I expect it won't end with him. But with this new paperback, I was able to take a look in the spring of 2021, whatever happened to this corporation or that accused individual white collar criminal? Have they reformed for the people who have, or are they repeat offenders? Surprise, surprise, these companies are still getting into trouble. And then as for the accused in one case, Elizabeth Holmes, no, she's not yet in jail. In fact, she's still on trial, merely accused of a crime, and we'll see what the jury will do. So it was a really interesting thing to, take another snapshot of these companies like General Motors, like the Purdue Pharma, which is the Sackler family, like PG&E, like Wells Fargo.
And we'll get into each of those as we go through this
Yes.
hour.
So that's what the book provides, an update, essentially.
When we last met, I hadn't read your book because you'd come to the after show and you were talking about all this other Trump stuff that we were doing. And you told me that when I read it, I'm going to be really mad. I'm going to get really, really angry. And it's an infuriating read because it seems like if you're rich, I mean, it's a brilliant read and it's amazingly researched and I love it, but it just says to everybody that if you're wealthy and if you're involved in a certain kind of elite world, you can get away with crimes and profit handsomely from it, that it's really a two-tier system.
I guess I have a little more hope than that, in that, yes, that's the current state of affairs. Usually, right? The exception proves the rule of that. But I think we can look in this book at periods of time when there was a commitment from the highest, from the president and the Department of Justice, to crack down on white-collar criminals. And you probably know, I'm not a Republican, I'm a Democrat, but it just so happens that the examples in our history, I have to be honest, were under Republican presidents. It was George Bush Sr. who engaged in the crackdown on the accounting fraud scandals. Now, I should also say, if you go back farther in history, we get to FDR, and FDR was amazing. He was from the same class as the bankers who crashed the economy then, but he didn't hesitate he did not interfere with the prosecution of Charles Mitchell, the head of National City, who went to jail for tax evasion. So I just saw today Kevin Cruz, the history professor from Princeton, when I was talking about Charlie Mitchell, he did a screenshot from a piece I think he wrote for Vanity Fair saying that when Roosevelt was asked about Charles Mitchell, he said, I felt like he was stealing my money. That's how Roosevelt identified with the public, regardless of his class background. And, that can happen. Unfortunately, I'm losing patience and hope when it comes to Merrick Garland as the statute of limitations keeps ticking on Trump in particular, but also white-collar crime generally. I don't see it being a priority at all.
Right. I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, let's talk about both of those things. You've got, the fact that we had a president in power here who is corrupt criminal mobster. That has never happened before, presumably, that we know of. And it's, that in itself seems like the ultimate sign of the decay of rule of law. But then this other piece that you just mentioned that, it doesn't seem to be changing that much. There's not only is there not a crackdown of the administration or Donald Trump, but there's not a crackdown in general against sort of big white collar criminals.
It's so funny that you're saying this because you're making me mad right now. I researched this, but I think what sustains my ability to be interested in this topic is it's enraging, right? And let's just take it into two pieces. In terms of white-collar criminals generally, when the Attorney General laid out what his priorities were, this wasn't one of the topics. And if people cannot see a connection between white-collar criminality or criminal tax evasion, for example, and inequality and corruption and public corruption, then I don't know what they're looking at. So I think, there was a way to make this a priority. It's not there. I think Joe Biden's priority. He talked in one of his first joint address to Congress. He talked about cracking down on tax evaders, and I know the Democrats are looking to fund the IRS, or at least most of them are. Unfortunately, not Richie Neal, who's head of the House Ways and Means, but that's a separate issue. You've got to make this stuff a priority. But separately, back to Donald Trump, the more I think about it, the more I think it is absolutely essential that Merrick Garland immediately, because it's already now we're over 6 months since he's been in his seat. He joined, March 10th? He was sworn in?
I think so. Late, but
we're
still.
Almost getting, we're getting to 7 months almost, yeah? And here's the problem. He needs to appoint a special counsel to look at all of the alleged criminal behavior of Donald Trump during his time in office. And the reason why I say special counsel is there is a major conflict of interest staring us in the face. That is this. Garland is allowing his Justice Department lawyers to represent Donald Trump in the defamation lawsuit that rape victim E. Jean Carroll brought against Donald Trump. This was something Bill Barr's attorney, Bill Barr, wanted to do, and Garland is continuing to do that representation. I have never heard of a situation where you can represent a client in one case and then prosecute them, or even
It does seem like a
that
conflict.
doesn't make any sense. Secondly, I'm very nervous about doing nothing about the very clear blueprint to an obstruction of justice indictment.
Right. Mueller left behind. I mean, it's
Mueller.
very clear
I've
what
got a
he
list,
intended.
right?
Yeah.
And then, so, I'm sure you've probably already spoken about it on your show and ranted about it when no one's listening. But this weekend, Donald Trump admitted that he had a corrupt intent when it came to the Georgia, the presidential election in Georgia. And, I am waiting for charges to be brought under, our conspiracy to defraud the United States, 18 U.S.C. 371. This is a perfect case. There are other possibilities here.
Merrick Garland is not seeing it as a conflict of interest, and he has no intention of prosecuting Donald Trump or anybody else, and he's going to defend, Donald Trump wherever he goes. I mean, it does seem pretty nerve-wracking and suspicious to me that it's taking this long. Although people tell me that RICO investigations and those kinds of things take a long time and settle down. This will happen. Is there any truth to that?
Look, investigations need to be done carefully and methodically, but you can also send signals that you're taking stuff seriously. And I think it was ridiculous that the department decided to represent Trump in the Carroll case. I think there are ways that you can give speeches, you can do other things to signal, and I don't see it that way. And I actually am very worried that Merrick Garland believes the same thing that Bill Barr does. I think he might believe that a president under Article 2 of the Constitution can never be accused, never be prosecuted for obstruction. I just think that he might believe that. And that's the only, what?
That's just a memo. Like, is that true? Is that what do you think of that particular understanding of that article? Like, is that an accurate, is there some truth in that?
Look, well, it doesn't matter, so here's the thing about law. I'm a legal realist, and what the judges say is the law ends up being the law. And in this case, we have a memo that Barr wrote before he became the Attorney General. But we also, if you may remember, we also got a kind of unredacted version of the internal memo that Barr that people constructed right around the same day. Barr put out that phony letter trying to make it look like the Mueller report was clean. Remember this?
Right. Yeah.
And the judge let part of that come out. And what we found out is in the preamble to that letter, you can kind of piece it together. What this means is there's an official Department of Justice memo that's still on file, that hasn't been superseded, that obviously is the same thing that Barr said before he got the job, that they don't believe, regardless, even if you could make out a prima facie case of obstruction of agency proceedings, which is what it would have been in this case, and so on, that it would not matter, because as president, as the executive branch, he can hire and fire whoever he wants, even if the motive is to interfere with an agency proceeding or whatever. You can look at all the other incidents. That is still on file, the Justice Department. And if I were the Attorney General, I would make sure that I made some sort of statement that memo is no longer officially the position of the department. Right. And here's why I would do it. I don't want Biden obstructing justice.
Right.
I would write a memo to the president that I would let the press see, saying, hey, Joe, don't think you can do this stuff. You know what I mean? But I would say it in legal.
You have to be able to set a standard. And you're right. He hasn't retracted that. He hasn't said in any way that that's no longer the case. We've not seen much movement in any way in terms of arresting any of the leaders, like the real leaders, the Roger Stones and Michael Flynn's of the world in January the 6th. And then, as you pointed out, there's the statute of limitations, which is slowly ticking away on cases like Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen, which, the first deadline, I think, is, the safest deadline is coming up on October 14th. That doesn't look like it's going to result in anything. It doesn't look like anything's going to be done there. Michael Cohen spent a lot of time in jail.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I love that you mentioned the October 14th date. So for those watching, you may remember that that was when the time when Michael Cohen had made payments, hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, and this is one of the things that this is out of those set of facts is why Michael Cohen ended up pleading guilty to many felonies. And when he appeared before the court, entering in his guilty plea, and in the documentation around that guilty plea, there was a co-conspirator called Individual One. Mm-hmm. And we all knew that was Donald Trump. And no charges were brought against Donald Trump in connection with that. So when you talk about the campaign finance fraud, most federal crimes have a 5-year statute of limitations, and you call it the safest date. It's a safest date because usually a statute of limitations, the clock usually, it starts ticking when the crime is committed. It could start ticking a bit later if it was something that was hard to discover, right? Or that you couldn't have discovered until earlier. But you never, a good prosecutor.
There's no need to wait, though. They know the case. They've already done all the work on it. I mean, what's new here?
Well, he wrote check. Remember when Donald Trump reimbursed Cohen for legal? But there's enough here, I believe, to bring this case. So, I should probably, after we get off of this show, mark my calendar for the Ides of October, and then
it's
cry
true. It
into
might
my
be coming.
cornflix.
It's true. It's coming. I think that a lot of people are going to be watching that date. There was a note as well from the Grisham book today that related to Stormy Daniels. So for a levity moment here, I'm going to throw this in. So I guess, Heidi, maybe you can tell us what this is. Sorry to throw you in here. But Grisham tells the story of Donald Trump calling her up and saying, no, my penis does not look like a toadstool, right? I mean, that's basically the story.
Yes, because, when you're on Air Force One and you need to talk to your press secretary, of course, you're going to call her to defend your manhood. And this goes back to having a carny / guy with weird mob ties as your president. But yes, that is our lulz moment. I threw that in there because we needed that palate cleanser. Yep. I have some stuff I'd love to run past Jen. Number one, she's absolutely right. Garland has to signal something because all the messages I'm getting from our viewers are losing hope. He's never going to be held accountable. That's number one. Number two, there is a laundry list of civil and criminal cases that could already be brought. And as Jen also said during our earlier conversation, is that Garland needed to appoint a special counsel right away and just start blitzing Trump with these lawsuits. That signals to the rest of the world that we're still, a country of law and order. And the last thing I'll say is that I really do think our country took a real hit when Ford pardoned Nixon. I think that signaled, hey, if you're corrupt, this might be the job for you. And that's my big concern still as we talk about these issues today.
I'm really interested in the special counsel, but let's talk about any of those you want to pick up at them. But let's also talk about that special counsel idea, which is such a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, can we just talk about Nixon? Because sure. Nixon resigned, though,
Yeah, it's true. He had the helicopter man. We never got that with Donald.
I mean, Nixon gave us, clean air and clean water. I mean, I don't mean to be singing his praises. He also gave us the Southern strategy and turned the Republican Party into the white supremacist nightmare that it's become. I mean, he makes Newt Gingrich and Trump look much worse than him. I'm saying it the wrong way. That they make him look like just small potatoes. But the special counsel idea isn't mine alone. I've seen people talk about it, but I didn't really put it together as a really good signaling device, and also as an ethical obligation at this point. And so I'm not looking for a special counsel just to run the clock. I mean, there's some but I think that the reason why people don't trust the Department of Justice when it comes to this is because, in part, the process, it has to be secretive, right? But also because, as Heidi said, there's no good messaging. There's no, the trouble is, Garland is an extremely bright man. That's an understatement, but he comes from the world of judging. And judges speak through their written documentation, and they don't have to. The way they communicate to each other, the way if they are wrong, then they get overturned by a judge in writing. Right? It's a very cerebral, and you don't have to. And then the public just picks up the paperwork, reads it, and then journalists will translate it for the rest of us. He doesn't live in. And judges are supposed to be dry. I'm making a stereotype here, but they're not supposed to be like. They're almost like he almost sees himself just in that way as. And judges talk about themselves as the court, right?
Yeah.
They're not a person. Well, he's now in a role of leadership, in charge of an entire department, of thousands of people, and also the chief, legal officer of the entire country of hundreds of millions of people. This is not a job where you can just put something in writing and everyone's like, oh, thank you, Sage.
Exactly.
This is a complete, for me, I always believe all of us have strengths and shortcomings. And there was this great book, and I'm trying to think of it was a business book and there's some business guru came to my job when I used to work at Fidelity Investments. And I really like this idea of pairing people with strengths and deficits and try to, instead of making people improve in areas that they just can't. Like someone who's a super sales guy, A+ at sales, bad at paperwork, you're never going to make him good at paperwork. Pair him with someone who's meticulous. And I think that Garland's meticulous and brilliant, but he needs to be paired with people who can make, like a press person who can make better public statements. And he needs to be paired with people who can understand emotional judgments and how people are going to be reacting to what he is doing. He's not. I think he's just not getting it. But then underneath,
he doesn't light up the screen in any way. He's sort of, when he does do those press statements, it's hard to watch. It's a very tough, long-winded explanation of what's going on that doesn't really lend itself to sound bites.
And what depresses me a bit is he did this good move, which I was so happy by suing in connection with the Texas anti-abortion law. And that was great. And the legal theories he offered went beyond just saying this is not consistent with Roe versus Wade and with the Constitution. He went on to some other ideas that will help give the government standing, because it's actually injured because the federal government has employees who also need health care, which includes abortion care and so on. The whole piece is really quite good, but we were just so relieved and so happy and so grateful. I'm thinking, looking back on it, that's the baseline. I'm still, I'm still, again, waiting for some sign that Trump will be held accountable. And again, I think the way to do it, besides the special counsel, is for Garland to rescind the memo to Bill Barr that accompanied the fake statement about the Mueller report. And he can rescind it by writing, I think, here's the idea, but Garland's never going to listen to me. So how about this? President Biden. Hey, Joe, and hey, whoever works there. I think you're amazing. I am impressed with you and what you've accomplished. I'm particularly impressed with everyone you're appointing to, like the SEC, the CFTC, the new head of the new nominee for the OCC. These people are truly the real deal. They're brilliant public servants. I know who a lot of them are because they're from academia and so on. I'm really pleased with what you're doing. I know it's eating you up inside that Garland's moving slowly on this. So here's what you should do. You should ask for an opinion from your own lawyers, and maybe they can consult with the Department of Justice saying, am I allowed to, does Article 2 permit me to fire a person, seek to fire a special counsel if you appointed one, if they were investigating me? Joe could just ask that and ask for a memo from the Justice Department. Hey, Joe, hey, President Biden, do that. Do that, please.
And that way you could prove what?
We would know where he stands. Because if he right.
Yeah, look, with the thing that you mentioned about the Texas rape law, they moved so quickly on that, and they are being quite effective in many, many ways.
I'm glad that you called it the rape law, because it also is a rape law.
Yeah, it is. Sorry,
but it is.
It sounds
absolutely.
like it's a horrible law.
Forcing someone to carry a baby to term is the equivalent of rape.
Yeah. It's just,
even if the sex was consensual. This is a woman's body. You cannot. If you've ever been pregnant and delivered a child, this is not just like. It's not a nothing experience. It's not, women should have bodily autonomy. But anyway, go ahead.
But they moved so quickly on that and effectively on that, and yet they haven't on Trump, it is scary that they have not made any signs that they're. I don't think they've interviewed him. They've never. I don't think
Right.
Roger Stone's been interviewed. I don't think any of these people have really been interviewed for any of these things. Michael Flynn's not been interviewed, as far as we know, and I'm sure we would know. I feel like they would let us know if they were doing any of these interviews. So it doesn't seem to me like that's going to happen, which means. And let's say Joe Biden is not fully enamored with your idea there and doesn't want to do what you're suggesting. Can the people do something? I mean, can we sue the AG and say, "Where's our prosecution"? Can we, can we? Is it marches? Is it what's the thing that the people can do?
You can get on the phone
Mm-hmm.
and ask, and say, what you just said, Zev, was so insightful, and you're right. He acted really quickly
Mm-hmm.
when he realized that women's reproductive rights were in jeopardy, and that Roe versus Wade was basically overruled if this could happen in a state.
Right.
I mean, he doesn't believe it's overruled, so he acted quickly. The fact everyone keeps telling me, "Don't worry, give him time." Well, no, our democracy is at stake every single day. That since the Mueller report came out till today, if nobody acts on it, there are other examples, of course.
He's
But
going to
what
run
the
for
heck?
president again. He is going to be the candidate next time, and he might win. And it's, who knows what happens after that? That doesn't, that doesn't.
But it's so
well.
interesting. We keep moving the goalpost.
Mm-hmm.
He won already.
Yeah.
He continues to lie about the election results because of his only caring about himself. He allowed hundreds of thousands of a virus to spread, and hundreds of thousands more people that would have died otherwise. He's continuing now because he got booed to downplay the need for the vaccine. But we are already in a situation where his need to perpetuate the great lie is dividing the country. He's destroying us. So, the idea that we're going to appease him, and I just want to use that word deliberately. The reason why Merrick Garland is so important is because he is the chief law enforcement officer. I mean, I'm sure you've heard many people, and I'm sure you've talked about Trump as being comparable to an authoritarian like Mussolini or Hitler, right? We've done that, or Orban, or whoever you want to choose. And we don't even have to look in the political realm. People keep forgetting to look in the white collar crime or organized crime realms.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. Do not appease dangerous people in power. I mean, we are now at the point where I believe Donald Trump has shot, hundreds of thousands of people on Fifth Avenue, and we're not doing anything about that. We're not doing anything about the insurrection. And we have a blueprint from Mueller. Why did we even wait for that? That's an amazingly written document. I actually read it. There's, what is Garland doing? What could possibly be taking him so long? It only took me a few days to read it. How many exhibits are there? It's been 7 months. I don't think he's going to act on it. And I don't think so either. I'm getting angry even as I say it.
I think the only sign that's, that there may be some sort of prosecution is with Vance in New York. I don't think there is any other indication that the federal government is going to be acting. Now, other people disagree, but, there is some hope in Vance doing something. But even then,
we have. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's just.
No, let me just. What you guys are saying is exactly what our viewers are asking right now, because they want to know two things. One, can the people of America do a class action lawsuit against Donald Trump for all the COVID deaths? And number two, they would like us to rattle off between the three of us. We can probably do it off the top of our heads. The criminal and civil cases that could already be brought or in the works, so they can start applying pressure on political leaders to make sure that these are prosecuted. So that would be both New York and federal. There's so many things. There's campaign fraud, election fraud, January 6th, Georgia, New York, the Donald Trump organization. There's so many things that our viewers are just aching to participate in.
Let me break into two. No, class actions are not the right.
I've lost your audio a little bit. I'm not sure if something's happened to your.
Just lift up your.
There, now you're here.
Okay. Sorry.
No.
A class action is not the right vehicle. And no, I don't think that's the avenue. But I think for people who want a thorough, comprehensive explanation, let's start with the state of New York, the and also the it's not just it's the Manhattan DA, which is different, right? Because that's a county,
Right.
and then with Fulton County in Georgia. If you
Right.
want to
That's a good
know,
case.
yeah, so the Fulton County case, Norm Eisen and a bunch of other people. Norm Eisen worked in the Obama White House, and he's an incredible ethicist. And there's a whole group of people, including Joshua Matz, who's a private attorney who was on the second impeachment trial, worked on it, and also happens to be the lawyer arguing the appeal in E. Jean Carroll's case. Anyway, a whole group of people, like 5 of them, just like 3 days ago, put out a report about Fulton County. It's like 107 pages long or something like that.
This was the call regarding Rafsenberger, right? Is that the same?
Yes.
So this is when Trump calls up Rafsenberger and says, find me the extra votes that I need, +1. I won anyhow. You've got to do it. Find me the votes. It's all on tape. We all heard it. Definitely happened without a doubt. Enough witnesses. It looks like he was trying to, rig the election. That seems to me a pretty good conclusion.
What's beautiful is this is a very long report, but there's an easy to read executive summary. And I think I don't know if there's I don't have access right now to YouTube, and I'm not on Twitter at the moment, but I'm happy later to drop a link of that.
Great.
And you can text it to me and I'll text it to our viewers.
Okay.
If you want to get it, you can get it to him right now. Oh yeah, I can get that to him. I'll drop that in there.
There's an email that has both that, and then also Norm did a report for Brookings, and that was over the summer, and that detailed the possible causes of action against Trump, the jeopardy he would be in New York. And, so what I
New
love
York could
about
happen and Georgia could happen. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
However, would the Supreme Court still be able to weigh in on those judgments if they did come down against him?
So I'm going to rephrase your question. If if a case comes through state court and someone is convicted under, and the conviction is held, it goes all the way up and is held up at the highest court. So let's say it's not reversed by the state Supreme Court. What are the circumstances under which the U.S. Supreme Court could intervene? And there would have to be some sort of federal issue involved. So it would have to be some sort of federal constitutional issue or federal statute implicated. And it's possible. I mean, we saw this happen. Right. Remember when Cy Vance wanted the documents, and this thing that should have just been a state law or a county law issue about a grand jury went all the way up to the Supreme Court twice, right? There's often a way to make a case.
I guess I'm asking if it does say what happens if he gets found guilty with the Rafsenberger case. Does that preclude him from what is? I mean, I don't know what the sentence would be.
There's nothing. By the way, even if there's nothing in the Constitution that prohibits someone from running for office while they're in prison,
if you're charged, I mean, the same thing would apply. You could probably still run for president if you're under
think about it. His campaign. I don't know how you could. A lot of prisons don't allow you to broadcast, but so I'm not sure how that would work. Yeah. But the nice thing about winning the presidency is then you could just pardon yourself and set yourself free. Which is kind of made for bad TV movie.
Yeah. So we're in a difficult situation. It doesn't appear to me like I agree with everything you're saying. I don't think Garland is going to do very much. If anything, it's going to be up to Vance and it's going to be up to Georgia, and that's pretty terrifying set of circumstances. But let's talk about the big picture. Let's assume the democracy continues and we still have a rule of law in America, which is a big assumption these days. But let's say that happens. In your book, you talk about so much of the corruption starting with business, starting in white collar crime. Like, it seems to me like that is sort of the point of infection. If that maybe wasn't it, then maybe it's the mob that first infected business, and then business infected the rest of society. But it looks like we've been corrupted by this virus of corruption that is so counter to who we are as a people and as who we say we are in our Constitution, that it's almost like we've. Yeah, I'll wait.
I mean, what? First of all, I guess two things. I think there's a symbiotic relationship between, public corruption and private corruption. And ironically today, although there are a lot of bad apples and the system is pretty corrupt because people are not enforcing the white collar crime laws as they should against business leaders, I think businesses these days look a lot better than a lot of the Republicans in Congress at this moment. But to say that this isn't who we are, I mean, this country was founded on, race-based chattel slavery, and I don't care if that was perfectly legal at the time. It was it was unethical. It was violent. It was, so the idea that we weren't built on crime, and you were trying. The problem I think today is that we are going backwards in our sense of progress. I think we're moving toward more equality in terms of economic equality, racial justice, women's liberation, you name it. And I feel like Trump helped us slide backwards because he was from that generation, and he's of the type that wanted things to stay the way they
So I
were,
don't think
right?
it's just him. I don't think it's him. I think there's an
No,
entire movement that,
yeah,
as we were discussing at the top of the show, whether it's a domestic
yeah,
movement or a global movement, it's probably both, that are trying to reinstate sort of a monarchist white Christian world, and they want to be in charge, and they're full on going to try and do it, and
yeah,
they've done it through these people like Donald Trump, who are these seedy, corrupt criminals, and they've managed to take those criminals and place them in our government, and subsequently, corrupted our government because of that. All the people in the Trump administration, whether it's Mnuchin or Wilbur Ross, or I can't remember this cast of characters, that each one of them is a criminal. Each one of them has done terrible things, and they were landing up in charge of major ministries. So I feel like that there's a lot going on beyond Donald Trump that is forcing this change into America, whether we like it or not.
And that's
yes.
a
And then on the
perfect place, Jen,
so,
to bring up the dark money changes to our law. The must-pass defense bill had a major significant piece of legislation in there to expose the beneficiary owners of all of these shell companies. So if you are in the Panama Papers, look out, because maybe we are going to see some significant changes. And I know, Jen, you've looked into that, because that could, what Zev was saying, that could actually be what ends this dark era.
yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I think this links to what I was saying earlier about praising Biden for the kinds of people he's putting in charge of the money stuff, right?
Mhm.
And so what happened right toward the end of the Trump administration, there was this must pass defense authorization bill, and slipped into that bill, and both parties supported this being put in, is this thing called the Corporate Transparency Act. And this is something that requires, so if you're it treats companies that are about to be born and created one way, and then existing companies have like 1 year to comply. The idea is, if you are a corporation or a limited liability company or any kind of entity that has to be established through a state Secretary of State's office, which is any kind of, like, it's usually a corporation, a limited liability company, and there can be other forms, certain kinds of trusts. If you are one of those entities, it used to be that you could do a lot in secrecy. Basically, in America, because we have this federalism system, there's a lot that the states just do without federal interference. And some aspects of establishing a business are purely controlled by the state. And then if your business grows big enough, or if you want to sell securities, sell shares in your company, then you're going to have a little bit of a lot of regulation by, let's say, the Securities and Exchange Commission. But fundamentally, when a corporation or a limited liability company is created, a lot of it, who the owners are, is never disclosed, right? When you establish a corporation, if you start an LLC, it's even more secretive. And every state has different rules for how much information has to be disclosed to the Secretary of State and how much is public. So what Heidi is talking about, which I think all of your listeners know about, is we keep hearing about shell companies. The really good movie, The Laundromat, I don't know if anyone saw this, based on the Panama Papers. We often think of, there's all these offshore havens where people create companies to launder money from bad activities like the drug trade or human trafficking, or you name it. But the reality is, the U.S. is the place that these days that people could go to launder their money because of our really lax laws,
Right.
including in Delaware and other states. So why this is a breakthrough, and is that all new companies, and I'm going to tell you the exceptions in a second. Companies that have fewer than 20 employees is an example. Like, if you're a company that has fewer than 20 employees, you don't really appear to have a lot of money coming in through you. That kind of company is going to have to say who their beneficial owners are. So
Right.
you get these. There are a lot of these companies that you don't really know what they do. And so beneficial owner means what's the full legal name the date of birth, the current address, and like their social security number. And this would also apply to companies that are organized under like a foreign country's laws if they are authorized to do business in the United States.
So if I'm
And
like a
so
Russian mobster who wants to buy a condo in a Trump Tower using an LLC, and I do that LLC under just my name, I would have to give, or the LLC's name, I would have to now provide my full details, my actual name, my actual social security number. So we would know who some of these people are who might be funneling in money through.
And you think there shouldn't be a lot of companies though, right? Because here's what an exemption, any company that's like has their securities listed on an exchange or you're registered with the SEC, bank holding companies and credit unions, things like investment companies, entities that are really highly regulated already, they don't apply. And even, so this is even true, if you have a company that files tax returns, and it makes more than actually it's not 5,000, I'm sorry, it's more than, if it makes more than 5 million a year and has 20 or more employees and has a physical presence, you don't have to either. So we're talking about, they're trying to get companies that seem to have almost no, fewer, if you have fewer than 20 employees, or if you don't seem to make a lot of money, you're going to have to register with not your state, but with the U.S. Treasury Department and the division called FinCEN.
Right.
And
that's
this
interesting.
is and it's a huge change in U.S.
FinCEN
law
doesn't have very much teeth, right? Like in the existing world, they don't really have much teeth. Does this give them more teeth to actually prosecute, or is it just going to be one of those things like they did with the FinCEN dump, which was, here's a bunch of people who moved money around illegally, but what can we do about it? Here's a list.
I'm more hopeful because I think it's that is it the Heisenberg uncertainty principle? What is the thing that light changes as you watch it? Is that
I have
what I'm talking about?
No
Okay,
idea.
whatever.
No
maybe
idea. But maybe the audience knows.
Oh, I'm sure they will.
Heisenberg principle?
The idea here is FinCEN has done these pilot programs where let me just back up. You know that where there's cash transactions for real estate, that's often a place to launder money. And what it does, besides laundering money, is it drives up prices in really hot markets.
Right.
And one thing FinCEN did, which demonstrates that if you watch the cash leaves that legitimate market, FinCEN in markets like Miami and New York and other big cities with a lot of cash sales, started to require for cash sales title companies to report cash sales, because as you probably know, banks have reporting obligations for suspicious transactions, but if you don't involve a bank in the purchase of a giant asset, you might not have someone who has to report. So they did this pilot program where they asked these title companies, and if you're going to buy real estate, you need to make sure you have title to it. Otherwise, what good is it? You can't then use it to borrow against or otherwise launder your money. And through this pilot program, what they saw, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but a lot of the cash transactions using limited liability companies, because that's what they were doing. Right. It wasn't like you or me buying cash. It was some LLC and no one could see the members. When the title companies had to collect the beneficial ownership information behind any LLC that was engaged in a cash transaction, there weren't so many cash transactions.
Interesting.
So I think part of it is you're going to probably move some of the dark money deeper into the shadows, but I'd rather have illegitimate money being in the illegal markets and not infiltrating our real market.
Sure, because then you can't prosecute. I mean, then you get stuck in a situation where you can't prosecute these people. What about a situation with Donald Trump? And you mentioned this in your book. He basically gave away his condos to people without any cash seeming to change hands, and these people could either be people of dubious Russian origin or people that he was trying to bribe or whomever. There's a lot of cases of that in Trump's
girlfriends
universe.
Or companions of known organized crime people who somehow managed. Oh yeah. So, and I was very careful, by the way.
Concrete scandal that he was involved in.
I was everything I wrote about Donald Trump, I was fully vetted by legal counsel. I had everything. I have a lot of endnotes in this book. So I was careful if I was using a secondary source that wrote about this stuff. A lot of you, you hear us talking or you read something. I mean, I went back to all the sources. I went back to SEC settlements. I went back to, I was very careful there. So I think you can, tell me if you see a mistake, but I was super careful with this. But yeah,
seemed pretty good to me. Everything I've done a lot of research in this world as well. So I feel like that, all your list there was pretty impressive.
And look, he was involved. He has all the hallmarks of someone facilitating money laundering. I mean,
Absolutely.
he settled a civil RICO case. This guy should have been, my view, that I think there were opportunities to prosecute him for RICO. There were opportunities to prosecute him for securities fraud. There were opportunities to prosecute him for his business for money laundering, if you look at this. But it's always, the excuse is always, well, who are the victims, and it'll be, really hard to prove intent and blah, 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 till he's now president of the United States and using the same con artist techniques, the same kind of corrupt money movement behavior. And it seems like he's untouchable. I thought no one was untouchable.
It does seem to, I
Bothers
mean, reading
me.
your book, it feels like a lot of people are untouchable. I mean, that's why I was so mad, because it doesn't seem like it's just Donald Trump, that there's just so many people who can get away with it and get away and get really rich off it. I mean, that's the most frustrating piece about the
Yeah.
book, is it's not that,
He was-
unless you commit crimes, you have zero chance of, or maybe a tiny chance, a 0.1% chance of becoming super wealthy and becoming part of that, fancy club that gets to fly to space and whatever else they do because they have tons of money. Unless you commit crimes, you're not going to be able to get there. You're not going to get to that,
Well, just to be
multi-billion
clear,
dollar status.
I did not accuse any of the people who have gone either into space or to the edge of space of any crimes, because I don't want to get sued
Right.
by Branson or Bezos or
Bezos,
anything.
the richest, and Musk. None of those people. Although,
Oh,
boy,
right. Did
you
he
can
go
make
to
a
the edge of
case.
space too?
No,
Okay.
but he sent his
car?
spaceship up. Yeah, he did. He sent 4 people
Our-
up there.
Our viewers would like to send a few of these people into space. Donald Trump sold 1,300 condos or apartments to, anonymous buyers, and only one of 2 developers, to do that at that time. And that may be legal, but it's really, really shady. And we all know now who these buyers were. They were a lot of foreign nationals of Russian origin.
Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
I think one thing we haven't talked about, and the thing that also enrages me, is try being a black man in America and
Right.
getting away with passing either let's talk about street crime, passing a $20 bill, or selling a mini tax evasion by selling loose cigarettes on the street. We see what's happened. And to make the other analogy, there's a story in the news about the head of Ozzy,
Yeah, that's a
or
good story.
his whether he's in. It seems to me, I mean, or Elizabeth Holmes. Let's just put it this way.
I'd love to
it
talk about all
seems.
those things in detail.
Oh,
So
yeah,
we
yeah.
have time.
I don't know how much time do we have?
Oh, we're running out of time. I want to talk about Elizabeth Holmes for sure. Let's
okay.
talk about that. I want you to finish your thoughts. Did you finish your thoughts? No, you didn't really.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, but I want to talk about Elizabeth Holmes. This is a case that, I don't know, it seems to be, to me, an example of what everything is wrong with the Silicon Valley, which I think is, and there's a lot wrong with Silicon Valley. Firstly, we have no idea where a lot of this money comes from. We have no idea. We sort of have a sense that these, big venture capital firms are funding all these big startups. But, some of them, like Facebook, have turned out to be really, concerning. They've really potentially been involved in the destruction of democracy. There's no regulation going on there. A lot of the money comes from Russia and other weird places that we can't really track who is funding it. Is it the Russian government, or is it an oligarch? We don't know. And it seems like there's been a real blind spot in understanding Silicon Valley and really prosecuting people there. And Elizabeth Holmes, to me, is just the perfect example. I mean, she sold people a bill of goods. Like, none of it was true. Like, none of it. So, and she got away with it until she made so much money. So that to me feels like, when you look at Facebook, you look at Twitter, you look at Elizabeth Holmes's thing, you look even Elon Musk's, operations there, they seem a little suspect sometimes. All of these are so concerning that there's just no attention paid to them, and they maybe are getting away with it because they're so high profile.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. I mean, obviously the book Bad Blood by, I always pronounce his name, John Carreyrou, and I think he's doing a new podcast because he's actually in the trial. I mean, there's no substitute for reading that or listening into it on Audible or whatever. Such a good book because it really helps document how she used kind of smoke and mirrors, which happens at some companies, whether it's Silicon Valley or elsewhere, to hype up the value of the stock of this public company. But what's most astonishing, I think, is how many,
Oops. I don't know what happened there. Jen, you froze. See, you mentioned Silicon Valley, you mentioned Twitter, and they freeze our video. You're back
I'm
now.
here.
I think you're back now.
So on the one hand, you ask, why is she the one? This is Ellen Pao asked this question. She's a lawyer from Silicon Valley who I think at one point was part of Reddit.
Mm,
And she asked, well, isn't it interesting that it's a woman who's being caught for this? And yeah, on the other hand, yeah, I think everyone should be held accountable when they do this stuff. But I think it's interesting how this sort of beautiful, young white woman captivated all these senior statesmen, literally, from business and from government to believe in her. And I think people really wanted to root for a woman in a very male-dominated industry, really wanted to see her succeed. And she had some great ideas, but a lot of us have great ideas, but it does, committing fraud to make people to save face, make money, and make people believe your good ideas actually work is entirely unacceptable. And she's still using her white womanhood to try to manipulate now this jury. I mean, I'm sure you heard what she's trying to use this, use this notion that because she was subject to physical and mental abuse from her
right, I heard that.
romantic partner,
Yeah.
that didn't have the criminal intent necessary
Mm,
to committed fraud. And I think it's an insult to all women who are in abusive relationships with their partners, or all people who have abusive families and relationships who don't actually commit fraud. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So I just,
And you don't see any other. I mean, to her defense, though, you don't see a lot of men in her situation. You could argue a case against Mark Zuckerberg pretty convincingly, I think, and he's not sitting in front of a court right now defending himself. I mean, it does seem like she's a standout, maybe because she is female.
who knows, right?
Mm,
This goes back to, do we have trust in the system? Is
mhm,
this, I think I would have prosecuted her based on these facts. The
mhm.
question is, who did they pass on? And we don't
Right.
know the internal workings
Right.
of the Justice Department to fully understand why X person or Y person didn't get prosecuted,
Mhm.
quite honestly. But, what she didn't just hurt her investors. There were real people who got false blood
Right.
results,
It's horrifying.
who suffered, and she seems to think she's the victim, which
She
I
does seem to
find
paint herself as that.
pathetic.
I have one last big question, then, and let's turn it over to the audience if they have any. But the all these settlements, like you talk about Purdue, you talk about all these other tobacco settlements, all these other big settlements, mostly against state prosecutions. The money goes to the state. The money doesn't go to the people who are actually victims in a lot of cases. It seems to me like there's a real challenge there, that the people who actually suffered under these circumstances don't get the money.
Well, sometimes I try to include this. Sometimes when there are separate lawsuits where victims are compensated, but sometimes there are these these civil and sometimes quasi criminal, like deferred prosecution settlements, where a lot of money does go into the federal government, and sometimes that's for restitution, and sometimes it's not. But I think the problem with victims is, I don't think victims getting a little money after the fact puts their lives back together. I mean, there's
Mhm.
some crimes for which we never identified the victims, and we actually never fully identified. I mean, let's look at Purdue Pharma
Yeah.
twice in its history. This is a Sackler's family. The company itself has pleaded guilty, and some of the executives, never the family members, and not recently. And the victims of their lying about and pushing opioids that were unsafe are family members and
Mm.
communities. And what money isn't going to put make your child or your friend or you not addicted now because you got hooked before you got
But if
hooked
they
on the new
died, it
drug.
might give you some comfort. I mean, there's some, not you some comfort, but your family some comfort. It just feels to me like it's always, the money grabbing that's going on both between corporations and the state and all these other people. It never seems to flow down to the little guy who might be really affected by the stuff. And I think it's just the nature of how expensive these prosecutions must be in other factors. Heidi, any questions online that we need to get to? Anyone else got any thoughts or any of your questions?
Oh, yeah. And also, I think Zev is referring to the big news today that the Cherokee Nation got a $75 million settlement because of opioids. And his point is, who's really going to get that money? Yeah. So I think the most critical question that has been asked, at least that caught my eye, is, and I think it's a really smart question, do you think that there is a fear of prosecuting Trump because of a fear of violence? And before you answer that, I will say that I'm friends with a US senator who told me maybe more than a year ago that often she believes, she's a Democrat, she believes that the Republicans were actually very afraid of Trump's base. And we are seeing madness and little green men and, you know, oath keepers, you know, fully armed to the teeth. And so I think that that's something that, you know, is important to get a response to.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely believe that collateral consequences, so to speak, always come in before prosecution is considered. And I'd be highly shocked if it wasn't considered. And I think it's a case of the mob is, you know, that because of the mob, he might be too big to jail, too big to
I
prosecute.
haven't heard that one before. That's good. Too big to jail.
Oh no, that's yeah. I mean, I think he might be. I think the mob is too big in this case, and I think Donald Trump. I think Garland's afraid of that. But there's a way you protect against us. We don't have a democracy. We don't. We could just admit. I mean, what I don't like is not telling the truth about it. Why don't they just say, yeah, we've just realized that we're so afraid of the biggest part of his base, and there might be some of them, maybe 5 million people who are armed, and we're afraid they're going to wreak havoc on the country. So we're never going to prosecute Trump. Just say it.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
or just
I
pardon
mean,
him
just
and just
say
say, you
it.
know, there's nothing. We're not going to do this. We're not going to go there.
But
'Cause-
I'm not that much of a coward, and I think that, you know, we already had, what is it? What is the number now? Is it 600,000 people who have
More.
died of COVID?
Oh,
What is the
more.
number?
It's
Oh,
approaching
more than that.
700. I think.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
how much
Yeah.
more of this do we have to take?
It's
It's crazy.
the
And
thing
I
is,
know
also,
he,
if they're projecting into what might get worse. I mean, you know, if he does become president again, it's going to get worse. It's not like we're going to hold on to the semblance of democracy that we have now. It's going, you know, we're potentially going to be in a civil war kind of situation where you've got like a real polarized country where, you know, maybe some states break away. Maybe there's a, an attempt to at least secede in some of them. And that could happen if he wins or loses actually the election. I mean, these are really challenging questions and issues. And the thing is, if you don't arrest him now, you're not going to get a chance later on. I mean, it seems to me once next year's elections are underway, which will be all about Trump, you can't really arrest him because you're sort of in the middle of an election campaign or at the start of an election campaign.
right.
The window
And to
is
be honest,
now.
you know, it's not about, you know, politics should never justify why you choose to prosecute someone. But similarly, politics should not be the excuse for not prosecuting
Right.
them. And we are
Right.
now, you know, Jesse Eisinger wrote a book, which is a classic called The Chicken Shit Club. And when I sent him a copy of the paperback, I said, you know, I hope Garland doesn't turn out to be a member
Yeah.
of the Chicken Shit Club, but I'm losing hope.
He's a part of the Federation, what's called the Federal Society, which is basically
Federalists.
Federalist Society, sorry, which is a terrifying organization. I was going to try to talk about that, but we don't have much time. Jen Taub, every time I say a word, I'm going to.
You did it.
I did it.
You did it. You did it. You're
You
good.
did it. You did it.
Okay. Jen, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really appreciate your time. The book is called Big Dirty Money, and everyone should buy it. You can download it right now on your favorite service, or you can buy it in paperback, which is great. Let's show everyone the cover. And Jen, tell us one last thing you want to encourage people to buy this book.
It won't just make your blood boil. It will actually make you smarter and know what to say when you get on the telephone and call the Department of Justice and say, enough is enough. Are you telling me Trump is above the law? You need to prosecute him now.
There you go. It's a really good sell. It really does make you angry, this book, I have to say. It's great read. It's great read because it's a page turner, but it's like, whoa, this happened and that happened. So yes, buy it and be prepared for a little bit of rage and maybe turn that rage into some protest, because I'm beginning to feel like it's okay. Maybe it's okay if we step out into the streets and say, we'd like to see some action about Trump. I mean, it's certainly not working any other way. And maybe some protests, may work. It's always scary because no one wants to drive people into a situation that could be, violent. But on the other hand, that's what this country is built on. We should be able to protest, and we should be able to at least have our voices be heard. When you've got someone like Merrick Garland, we all thought he was going to do one thing. He's not turned out to do that one thing. I think in that case, it's okay to protest, and we should be protesting and demanding that Donald Trump be brought to justice. Heidi, any last thoughts from you?
Oh, just, thinking about everything and just realizing that we never want to leave people feeling downbeat.
Yes.
And, we've got Barrick. They arrested him and indicted him. We have examples of, prosecutions that are going through the system right now. But yes, please, Merrick Garland, signal to us that we can expect prosecutions to come. And it's not just Trump, it's Flynn. It's these guys who are bad actors, who are stirring up, people and brainwashing people, and give us something to show that we still are a democracy.
And another upbeat thing to say, thank you, Heidi, is another reason why to read this book and not get upset is because if you're still outraged, it means you still have a heart and there's still hope.
Absolutely. I mean, it opens your eyes, and it's important. It's just important for people to realize what we've all been living through. Then this slow creep of corruption and that's been going on. It's something we really need to focus on and to turn around. And I believe we can. I mean, I think the will of the people at the end of the day is much stronger than any mob, and much stronger than any even foreign adversary who's trying to poison our country. The American model, the American ideal, is an incredible ideal, and it's an experiment that only we've tried, and it seems to have done great things for the world. Turning it around and turning it to something that we know is not going to be nearly as successful or interesting, there's no point in that. So we really should be doing everything we can to preserve it, not just for us, but we've got generations of people to come, and those people need dreams, and they need ideals, and they need to achieve everything they want to achieve. And if we don't do it for them, it's going to be a pretty dark scene. So we should definitely focus on that. And I think the will of the people at the end of the day will succeed, as it has in most cases around the world. When you've seen this kind of conflict, the people do actually overcome. And so let's hope that that's the case in the United States as well. Thanks very much for joining us on Narrative tonight, Jen. Thank you very much. Good night, Heidi. We'll be back tomorrow night with another show, and Steve Hassan will be here to talk about his book, The Cult of Trump. Very similar themes, but slightly different. He'll also talk a lot about the Moonies, because the Moonies have had this giant role in everything that's happened with January the 6th, and we'll figure out why they've been so involved, and why Donald Trump headlined their recent meeting in Korea. So all that's coming up tomorrow, and until then, have a great night, everybody. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, Ed.